Hey everybody, today we are going to learn about parallel lines cut by transversals. So some things that we learned in our previous lesson, one of them is what is a transversal. So when you have two lines intersected by a third line, this line right here is called a transversal. It intersects at least two other lines. Okay? Now we learned about corresponding angles. We also learned about alternate interior angles, alternate exterior angles, and consecutive interior angles. Now let's talk about those types of angle pairs when they are on parallel lines. So yesterday's lesson, it was just any two lines. Today it's specifically about parallel lines. So if you have two parallel lines, which we have here, and I know that because of this extra set of arrows, and they are cut by a transversal, right here is our transversal, then the pairs of corresponding angles are congruent. Okay, so corresponding angles, you may recall, are angles in a similar position like angle 2 and 6 here. They're both in a top right position. Okay, so because these are corresponding angles and they are on parallel lines, they are congruent to each other. So angle 2 is congruent to angle 6. Okay, so in this diagram, 3 of the numbered angles has measures of 120 degrees. So there's 120 here, and then the rest of them are just given numbers. Identify the angles that are 120 degrees. Okay, so I have an angle here that's 120, and it's in a top left position. And right here is another angle in a top left position. And because they are corresponding angles on parallel lines, I know that these two angles are congruent. So I know that the measure of angle 5 is 120 degrees. Explain the reasoning for that. Here's my reason. It's that these are corresponding angles on parallel lines. So the corresponding angles postulate tells me that they are congruent. We've got parallel lines and corresponding angles. So according to the corresponding angles postulate, these are congruent angles. Okay, next I can say that angle 4 is right across from the 120, so it must also be 120 degrees. So the measure of angle 4 is 120 degrees. Why? Because it is a vertical angle to the 120. So I'll say my reason is vertical angles. Okay, vertical angles are always congruent. So now I'm in a bottom right position, and over here, angle 8 is also in a bottom right position. So that's a pair of corresponding angles. So angle 8 is 120 degrees. The measure of angle 8 is 120 degrees. Because of the corresponding angles postulate, and I'm going to make a note here that it's corresponding with angle 4. I could also have used vertical angles as my reason for this because angles 5 and 8 are vertical, and since I know this is 120, this must also be 120 degrees. The alternate interior angles theorem. Okay, so remember from way back in our first lesson, this is a postulate because there's not actually a proof for it, even though it's just always true no matter what. This one there is a proof for. The alternate interior angles theorem says that if two parallel lines are cut by a transversal, that's what we have here, lines P and Q are parallel, and they're cut by a transversal, then the pairs of alternate interior angles are congruent. Okay, so angle 4 and 5, they're interior because they're between the lines. They're alternate because they're on opposite sides of the transversal. So angle 4 is congruent to angle 5 because they are alternate interior angles between parallel lines. The same is true for alternate exterior angles on parallel lines. So if two parallel lines are cut by a transversal, and here's lines P and Q, the arrows say they're parallel. Here's our transversal. then the pairs of alternate exterior angles are congruent. So angles 1 and 8, they are both exterior because they're outside of P and Q, and they're alternate because they're on opposite sides of the transversal. So angle 1 is congruent to angle 8 because of the alternate exterior angles theorem. And our last theorem, the consecutive interior angles, like angles 3 and 5 here. If two parallel lines are cut by a transversal, then the pairs of consecutive interior angles are supplementary. Okay, which means that the measure of angle 3 plus the measure of angle 5 is 180 degrees. Okay, now find the value of x. Okay, so this angle right here is 115 degrees. That means that this vertical angle here is also 115 degrees. And what I'm looking at here is a pair of consecutive interior angles. So I know that x plus 5 plus 115 has to add up to 180 degrees. Okay, I've got like terms here. X plus 120 equals 180. Subtract 120 and I get x equals 60. Okay, that's all I'm asked for, the value of x. So I'm going to put a box around that. But I'm also going to do a quick check here. Since I know these should add up to 180 and I know x is 60, I'm going to do 60 plus 5. Okay, so that gives me this angle, plus 115, and that's 180. So that's a quick check to tell me that my answer was correct. All right, if the measure of angle 1 is 105 degrees, find the measure of angle 4, 5, and 8, and tell which postulate or theorem you use in each case. All right, so angle 4. Those are congruent angles. The measure of angle 4 is 105 degrees. How do I know that? Because it's vertical to angle 1. So vertical angles. Okay, and I'll put in parentheses with angle 1. So it's vertical with angle 1. Okay, 1 and 5 are both in a top left position, so they're corresponding angles and the lines are parallel. Okay, so 1 and 5 are congruent. So the measure of angle 5 is 105 degrees. Okay, and why is that? It's because of the corresponding angles postulate, and I'm going to say it's corresponding with angle 1. Angle 4 and 8 are corresponding. They're both in a bottom right position. So angle 8 has that same measure of 105 degrees because of the corresponding angles postulate, because it's corresponding with angle 4. Or I could put vertical angles because 8 and 5 are vertical. So with angle 5. So all 4 of these angles now are 105 degrees. Now what if we wanted all the rest of the angle measures? So 1 and 3 here are a linear pair, so I could just do 180 minus 105 and get 75 degrees. So angle 3 is 75. Vertical angle here, angle 2 is 75 degrees. Corresponding with 3, both in a bottom left position, angle 7 is 75 degrees. Corresponding with angle 2, both in a top right position, is angle 6, 75 degrees. Okay, if the measure of angle 3 is 68 degrees, okay, so now that's coming back up to here. I'm going to change to a pencil on that picture just to get a different look in there. So if angle 3 is 68 degrees, so we're forgetting all these other angle measures, they no longer exist, and the measure of angle 8, and I put that on the wrong angle, didn't I? That was brilliant. Angle 3 is 68 degrees, and angle 8 is 2x plus 4 degrees. What is the value of x? Okay, so these are both exterior, but they're on the same side, not opposite sides. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start with 180 minus 68. Okay, I can use a calculator for that. So 180 minus 68 is 112. Okay, so that means angle 4 is 112 degrees. So now I've got a pair of corresponding angles, so they're both in a bottom right position, so these are congruent to each other. So 2x plus 4 is equal to 112 degrees. Okay, so I can subtract 4 and get 2x equals 108 and divide by 2, and x is 54. Okay, now let's substitute that. So 2 times my value of x, 54. So we got 2 times 54 plus 4. I don't want two pluses there. Is 112, just like it was supposed to be. Okay, so we know we did that work correctly. Okay, next up. When sunlight enters a drop of rain, different colors leave the drop of rain at different angles, and that's the process that makes a rainbow. So whatever angle the sunlight leaves the drop of rain from makes a different color. For violet, the measure of angle 2 is 40 degrees. What is the measure of angle 1, and how do you know? Okay, so these lines, these rays of sun, are parallel to each other. Okay, so we've got a reflection of that light at 40 degrees, and that makes violet. What's this angle measure right here? Well, we've got parallel lines, and these are alternate interior angles. Angle 1 and 2 are both between the parallel lines, but on opposite sides of this transversal. And alternate interior angles between parallel lines are congruent. So I know the measure of angle 1 is 40 degrees. How do I know that? Because of the alternate interior angles theorem. Suppose the diagram in example 4 shows yellow light leaving a drop of rain. So it's leaving from right here. It'll go down here to your eyes. And it leaves at a measure of 41 degrees. What is the measure of angle 1 in this case? The measure of angle 1 is 41 degrees because they are alternate interior angles. So based on the alternate interior angles theorem.